Hello, Sid Roth here with a friend I've known for 30 years, Joseph Benjamin. He's a Jewish believer in the Messiah, as I am. A few years ago, he had this Meshugana idea that he wanted to have a trial in Israel. What did you tell me?
That the trial back in first century was unfair. It was illegal. It was against Jewish law. There were trumped up charges, and we need to call for a mistrial and have a fair trial for Jesus today, because the verdict has everlasting consequences.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, what you're seeing is a set we just designed so that what Joseph said to me is going to become a reality throughout Israel and throughout the world. We are having a trial. And this trial has a jury. And you are the jury. And after you see all of the evidence, we're going to have you vote whether there should be a retrial or not. Now, Joseph, most of my viewers aren't that familiar with you. I remember way back when you had a grandmother that could not stand on her head. Was that you?
It was, yes.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
Crazy. Meshuggah.
Well, yeah.
Tell a brief version of your grandma who couldn't stand on her head and how Joseph Benjamin became as strong a Messianic Jew as I am, and I'm pretty strong.
Well, I was realizing when I was practicing yoga.
Yoga?
Yes.
That's a nice Jewish sport.
Yes.
Of course, it's gurus, and it's Eastern, and it's meditation.
Crossing your legs, you can't have arthritis.
Later you will. But go ahead.
So here I was standing on my head trying to find God, and the thought came to me was, my grandmother is never going to stand on her head. I'm
not going to stand on my head. I can tell you, I won't say I can't, because all things are possible, but go ahead.
So I'm thinking, if God is for everyone, how could he not be for my grandmother? So I knew that this was wrong. But another funny thing about my grandmother is after I came to know the Lord, I was trying to explain to her that God wants to live inside of her, that the Messiah, that the Holy Spirit would live inside of her. So this stayed with her. We talked a little while, and then, of course, like any good Jewish grandmother, she went into the kitchen to make something to eat.
Of course.
So I'm in the living room, and she's in the kitchen, and she starts talking to herself, and she starts going like this. Inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside.
I see where you get your sense of humor.
She's trying to figure this out. And so that is one of the things. And my grandmother, before she died, listen to this. She used to go like this when I talked to her. She would go, Jesus schmeezus. But my grandfather, Papa Saul, would say, Jenny, he was a smart cookie.
How did you become a believer in the Messiah?
Before I answer that, both my grandmother and my grandfather prayed with me to receive Messiah before they passed into the next
that's wonderful.
How did I become a believer?
How did you become a believer?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm talking about this on one of the segments, but I was involved I was a searcher. I wanted to know the truth. I used to look at the sun, at the stars, and I'm saying, someone must have made this. We can't be here by accident. If we were closer to the sun, we'd burn up. If we were further away, we would freeze. There must be something about this. And I knew there must be something about being Jewish, because every time I would hear the God of Israel and Moses and Passover, somehow I knew it was true, but I couldn't put two and two together. So I began this search, and it led me, I was talking about my experience at Woodstock, which was my experience with the dark side of the spiritual world, but it started opening up unseen realms, and I was fascinated. And eventually I started practicing New Age stuff, meditating, breathing.
Why is it, I don't want to get too far adrift, but why is it that we Jewish people gravitate towards anything supernatural without discernment of knowing, is it from God or is it from evil disguised as good?
Right.
And you go to many of these cult groups loaded with Jewish people. I believe we are seeking.
Yes.
But we're seeking in the wrong direction.
Well, it's in our kishkes. It's part of who we are. We're called by God to be a light to all people, so we're kind of always looking for the light, but we're not finding the real light until we find the light of the world. But my story is, I started dabbling in these things, and to make a long story short, one morning I was meditating as a Jewish Indian, like I was like a yogi bear or whatever I was, and I was crossing my legs, and for some reason I grabbed my prayer shawl from my bar mitzvah, my talit, my talis. I wrapped it around as I am meditating like this with my legs crossed, and I'm telling you, I heard a voice. It sort of even was in with like a Yiddish accent. And now, looking back, it was God. He said to me, "What are you doing? You're Jewish." That startled me. And here I was, I had my shawl on, but I was doing this Indian guru breathing thing, trying to find the God within and all of that stuff. And I thought, yeah, I'm Jewish. I had my talit on, and I thought, what does that mean? And it dawned on me that it was Saturday morning, the Sabbath. And I thought, you know what? I never observed Shabbos ever as an adult. And I said, listen, I'm testing out everything. I'm going to test out observing the Sabbath as a Jew and see what happens. So, actually, my brother called me up. He wanted to take a ride. I go, nope, it's the Sabbath. No driving.
You became real Orthodox all of a sudden.
In a moment, right. And so I left my house, and I said, what is there to do on the Sabbath? You walk. And so I took a walk. Well, Sid, out of nowhere, this man approaches me. He had a dark beard and bright, piercing blue eyes. And he just walks right up to me, and he goes, "How is your faith in Jesus?" I immediately said to him, "I'm Jewish, and I don't believe in Jesus."
And that stops, unfortunately, most Christians in their track. Should not be, but it stops you guys.
And what he said to me, well, I'm also Jewish, and I do believe in Jesus. And I said to him, what? How can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus? And he said, I'm glad you asked. And he had a little Bible with him that he whooped out of his pocket. And he started to show me Isaiah chapter 53, which talks about this man who suffers and suffers for the sins and takes away sins. And looks like, let me make sure is that the New Testament? No, that's the Hebrew Scriptures. Then he starts showing me this thing about a virgin that'll bear a son, and you will call his name Emmanuel. Well, I knew it. So it was also from the Hebrew Bible. And I knew Emmanuel was a Hebrew thing because in my neighborhood there was Temple Emmanuel. It was the Reformed synagogue. Okay.
But it also means God is with us.
Yes, I found that out later. And then it says in the 9th chapter of Isaiah that to you a son will be given. Oh my goodness. And he'll be called Everlasting Father. Mighty God. Son, God, oh boy. And then there's Micah 5:2, which talks about Bethlehem, that a leader, a ruler is going to come forth. I go, wait a second. It's talking about Jesus in the Hebrew Bible? Whoa. Here I am supposedly seeking the truth. I thought to myself, I got to get away from this guy. This is too much. And I said, goodbye and good luck. And I kept walking. 15 minutes later, another man comes up to me. He had a dark beard, bright, piercing blue eyes, and asks me, how is your faith in Jesus? I said, I just spoke to you. What did you just ran ahead to kind of trap me and speak to me again? He goes, I never saw you before in my life. I said, what? Who are you? It turned out that it was J. Edelman's identical twin brother, Charles. So God sent two identical twins to apprehend me.
What's the probability of that, jury? Now, that's not what we're judging on, but there is no probability. It's off the chart of probability. Did they confer with each other?
No. No. They were out there.
Okay,
talking to
so
people.
you have this amazing sign. You see scriptures in your own Jewish Bible that if you don't get a rabbi to confuse you, and you just read simple Hebrew or simple English if it's translated, you have to come up with the conclusion that the only one in history that fulfilled those is Jesus. And of course, he was known as Yeshua. I've heard songs with Yeshua. It's so pleasing to the ear. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so the twins give their double trouble. Then
Yes.
what?
Well, the second twin showed me everything else in the Hebrew Bible about, I clearly saw it. Jesus is out throughout the pages of the Hebrew Bible. He showed me like Zechariah 9:9, when the king is riding on a donkey. I knew that from watching the movies. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. So I knew all these things, but did I really know? So I said goodbye to the second twin and went my way. Well, like I said, I was living in Staten Island.
Oh, by the way, there's something that just happened about a minute ago. I didn't want to interrupt Joseph. Our most important guest has shown up big time. His name in Hebrew is Ruach HaKodesh. Right. His name in English is Spirit of God. And when he shows up, all bets are off the table. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. I have talked to people that have had every miracle that I read about in the Bible that Yeshua demonstrated. All of them are happening today. Anyway, so, double trouble, the twins leave, now what?
Just went on with life, and I think it was about 2 weeks later, I took the Staten Island ferry to Manhattan to go to a jazz concert in Greenwich Village. So I get on the ferry, and as I'm on the ferry, who do I see on the ferry? The first twin.
And I was going to tease you because I don't remember this story at all. He told me it 30 years ago or something. But I was going to tease you and say, did you see the twins again? And that's what just came out of his mouth. Go ahead.
He saw me. He comes over to me. I'm sitting on one of these wooden benches on the Staten Island ferry heading to Manhattan, surrounds me with his friends, looks at me, and goes like this with his finger. You need to be saved. You know what? I knew he was right. It was like I knew that it was true. It's like it wasn't because of anything else, but I knew it on the inside. And I said, okay, the ferry boat docks. We left the ferry and we walked to a park. And right there, it's called, I think, Battery Park. And right in the shadow of the World Trade Towers, which was still standing back then, it was June 17th, 1975. These guys got in the dirt, on the grass, on their hands and knees, and they started calling out to God for me. I never heard anyone pray for me in my life. And they were asking God to save me, to give me His Spirit. And then they said, we want you to repeat these words. And I did. Father God.
Stop 1 second.
Yes.
With the Spirit of God here so strong, I would like you to lead the viewers in that same prayer, and I will repeat it where you're supposed to repeat it.
Let's go for it. These are the words that I spoke to God.
And I believe anyone that sincerely speaks these words will have a knowing, an experience, will have confirmation after confirmation that what Joseph is saying is true.
Okay. The club. I walk outside. I said, what has happened? I'm telling you, the grass was greener than I ever saw it. The sky was bluer than I ever saw it. Everything seemed new, and I felt like as light as a feather, like I was ready to take off. Now I look back, I was filled with the presence, with the Spirit of God. It's like I knew that whatever happened that when I prayed in that park was real. And Sid, I have something to say. I have never been the same since.
And you know what? I have something to say. Same thing happened with me, except I was in a very bad depression when this occurred. Depression could not stand in the presence of the living God. And I was so grateful that anything God would have said to me, anything I would have done. I don't know about standing on my head, but anything.
I think you would have even done that.
I probably would have.
You know what, Sid? I didn't explain this, but and I did talk about this, my experience at Woodstock, where I actually met the spirit of darkness there. And that was all over the place. But I had this deep depression where I couldn't even get out of bed. And once the Lord came into my life, I was just free of anything, any darkness that was in me, anything that made me feel bad. In fact, I felt like, wow, now I know why I'm alive.
Tell me about 3 or 4 zingers as to why you say that Jesus had a mistrial.
Well, the main reason is I've never met a Jewish person, and most of them don't believe in Jesus, to explain to me why he doesn't believe. And so what happened in first century Israel is that there was a decision made then by the most corrupt leaders in all of Jewish history, and their decision has been passed on to us today, and that decision was Jesus is not the Messiah, and we're still waiting for him, and that is a blatant lie. If you look at what happened in the trial of Jesus, it was unfair. There were witnesses that were false witnesses. He was killed because the leaders of Israel at that time were furiously jealous of him. He was taking away all their business. The people were flocking to Jesus. They were losing their power. They were all going to him, and they felt like chopped liver. And they said, we got to get this guy out of the way because he's in our way. They didn't realize that he is the way for all men, Jewish people first.
I can't wait for this show to get out all over the world, especially in Israel. And what I recommend is you look at our free on-air network on the computer. It's online. It's called It's Supernatural, ISN. Let me tell you how simple it is to download it. All you do is you go to your app store and type in my name, which is Sid, S-I-D, R-O-T-H. Anywhere in the world you can do this. And a network will appear. It's an orange app. It says ISN. Download it. It's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day of programs that people have had an encounter with God, and the presence of God is going to pour out. And more important than that, every time you view it, you'll learn something about the ways of God, the Spirit of God. Look, a decision was made if you're Jewish or if you're not Jewish many, many years ago that you got put into you. Right or wrong? Think for yourself.
That's right. You know, Sid, I believe that people should really have a righteous anger about this. Like that these men had an unfair trial. They made a decision that has been passed on. In other words, people, Jewish people especially, don't believe because these hypocritical leaders who were not true servants of God made a political decision, a political religious decision that has been passed on, and I believe that every Jewish person and every Gentile needs to say, wait a minute, you're not going to decide my future. You're not allowing that decision to pass to them, because that's what has happened. That decision and it's the worst decision ever made in all history. Not only Jewish history, in all history, the rejection of the King of Glory, the Messiah, the promised Messiah. And Jewish people were supposedly waiting. In other words, one of the 13 precepts of what it means to be a Jew is that we are waiting with perfect faith for the Messiah.
Sure.
But he's already come. Those guys had it all wrong in the same way that they do today. Why should we listen to them?
Yeah, and I, because of what you just said, I have to add something. There's actually two sets of predictions about the Messiah in the Jewish scriptures. One, he'll come to change you on the inside out. Mm-hmm. Two, he'll usher an age of peace. What good would it be to have an